Well, another issue of life that's a prudential issue for Catholics is immigration.
On the record with former Vice President Mike Pence, as EWTN News begins a series of interviews with presidential candidates.
It felt like justice was happening.
5 years after the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history, a mass shooter is sentenced for the hate crime that took the lives of 11 worshipers. We hear from survivors. And Pope Francis greets massive crowds at World Youth Day in Lisbon, a complete wrap of events from EWTN Cruise in Portugal. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
I'd like the day to come that abortion is not only illegal, but it's unthinkable. I'll advance the cause of life in every state in the country. I do think the time has come for a minimum national standard.
Mike Pence sits down with EWTN News to talk about the policies he would try to advance if he is elected the next president of the United States. Hello, welcome to EWTN News In Depth. I'm Catherine Hadro, sitting in for Montse Alvarado on assignment in Napa, California. The race is on for the White House. Though we've heard from many of the politicians who have announced their candidacies, campaigns are about to go into full gear with the first Republican primary debate. That debate is scheduled for Wednesday, August 23rd in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. With just 3 weeks to go, more than half of the large GOP field is running short on time to make the cut. To qualify, candidates need to satisfy both polling and donor requirements set by the Republican National Committee. So far, the candidates who have met the threshold to make the debate stage are former President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Prominent Republicans who have not qualified for the debate at the time of our show taping include former Vice President Mike Pence, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, and former Texas Congressman Will Hurd. There are many other Republican candidates still vying to get on the debate stage who are not household names. As the GOP frontrunner in the Republican primary, former President Trump has never committed to participating in the debate. He has reportedly been told by some advisors that he does not need to debate since he leads his nearest rival by double digits in the polls. Mr. Trump is facing mounting legal pressures that could also impact his debate decision. He returned to Washington, D.C. this week for arraignment at the federal courthouse, where he pleaded not guilty to charges he conspired to overturn the results of the 2020 election. A federal indictment announced this week accuses him of trying to subvert the will of the voters and obstruct the certification of Democrat Joe Biden as president. That culminated in the riot at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. As he boarded his plane on Thursday to return to his home at Bedminster, New Jersey, Mr. Trump told reporters he is a victim of political persecution. The next hearing in this case is at the end of this month, when a tentative trial date will be set. Former Vice President Pence could be at the center of the case after the special counsel subpoenaed him, and he shared his contemporaneous notes from the time period around January 6th. In them, he recorded his private conversations with Mr. Trump, who urged him to overturn the election results during the certification process on January 6th in his ceremonial role as Senate president. After this week's indictment, Pence put out a statement condemning the former president. He wrote, "Our country is more important than one man. Our Constitution is more important than any one man's career. On January 6th, former President Trump demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. I chose the Constitution, and I always will." Prior to this week's indictment, Pence sat down with our Montse Alvarado for an in-depth discussion about his campaign for president. It is the first in a series of candidate interviews EWTN News will be conducting before the presidential election of 2024. Our focus, asking questions from a Catholic perspective that you might not hear in interviews elsewhere. Here's Montse's conversation with the former vice president.
Vice President Pence and candidate, it's so great to be with you here in this beautiful setting. Thank you. Thank you for making time.
Thank you, Montse. It's wonderful to be with EWTN and also at the Napa Institute. So many great Americans, a deep conviction in their Catholic faith.
Absolutely.
Love this country, and it's a joy to be here.
Well, let me ask you about that Catholic faith. That's the elephant in the room here. You were raised Catholic. You know the truth and the beauty of the church, and yet you were led away. Tell us about that.
Well, I was just led away from faith. And by the time I was in latter years of high school, I lost interest in religion. I was raised in a wonderful Catholic family. My father was a devout man of the church. My mother, who's 91 years young.
That's nice.
Still goes to Mass several times a week. But for me, it was just walking away from faith itself. And it wouldn't be until I would be off at college and begin to reflect on what that Catholic Christian upbringing had given me, what my faith required of me, that I came to a personal faith. And while our journey has taken us elsewhere on Sunday mornings, I tell you, I'd love to attend Mass with my mother. And,
that's beautiful.
I cherish my Catholic upbringing and that great Catholic education that I got.
That's good. Well, Catholic education is really important. We'll get to that in a second.
You bet.
But you've seen a lot of anti-Catholic bigotry. You were Kennedy Catholics. You know what that feels like.
Sure.
Are you worried about what's going on in the FBI?
Well, I'm worried about what's going on at the Justice Department, frankly. I've made it clear that if I'm elected President of the United States, we're going to clean house on the whole top floor of the Justice Department. Not just a new Attorney General, a new Director of the FBI, but also all the people that serve around them. I mean, to see what many Americans believe has been the unequal treatment under the law, but worse still, targeting pro-life Catholics in this country, people of deep conviction and faith. Actually, have circulated a memorandum to even reflect on that. I think it says to me that something has gone awry at the highest levels. Truth is, most of the men and women that go to work every day at the FBI and in the Justice Department are good, decent Americans. Many of them are people of faith, love their families and love this country, but the leadership has lost its way. And as president, I know we can pull together a group of men and women that have respect on every side of American politics, men and women of integrity who will restore confidence in the Justice Department.
Well, you talk about the core values of the Republican Party, and a lot of Catholics, they feel like they don't fit into either party. Can you articulate for us, what are those core values today, the ones that matter to you?
I think first, strong national defense, and a willingness for America to be a leader in the world. Look, if we're not leading the free world isn't being led. That's why I've been such a strong voice for giving the Ukrainian military what they need to repel that Russian invasion and to stand strong against China's provocations in the Asia Pacific. But beyond that, I also believe our party is about fiscal responsibility and reform. And frankly, your generation and your children are going to face a debt crisis, the likes of which we've never seen. I think Republicans are the party that should be restoring balanced budgets and bringing reforms to put our nation on a solid fiscal foundation. And ultimately, our most important values are our commitment to the right to life, to religious liberty, to traditional values, to traditional marriage. And as long as I'm a candidate, and frankly the rest of my life, I'll always be a champion of those values that were exactly the values that drew me to the Republican Party to begin with. A little secret for you, I was actually a Democrat.
Oh yes, I've read about that. You're a Kennedy Democrat.
I was a Kennedy Democrat, but I'll tell you, when I heard the voice of Ronald Reagan and I heard that commitment to a strong defense, limited federal government, traditional moral values, I joined the Reagan Revolution and never looked back.
Well, how do you then, talking about life issues that are so important, how do you then square the protection of life and what comes post-Roe and the needs of women and children and families with that limited government perspective? We have a government that's much bigger now. Can we actually find a happy medium there that supports women and children and at the same time gives us and the family a primary role?
Montse, I think you put your finger right on. I think the way we make progress in the cause of life in America is by standing on principle for the unborn, but also marrying that with a commitment to compassion for women who've been through abortions over the last 50 years and for women that are in crisis pregnancies today. I truly do believe, when I think of the example of our Savior. It was an unwavering expression of truth combined with deep and healing compassion for people. And I believe that's that he who we follow should be he who we emulate in this cause, because I think that's how we win hearts and minds in America. I mean, I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. I want to see us restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law in every state in America. But I understand that we've got to win hearts and minds. And I believe the way that we do that is by standing without apology for life, but also in an increasing way coming alongside women who are facing crisis pregnancies and demonstrating our commitment is as strong for newborns as it is for the unborn. And states around the country are doing that. The state of Texas passed strong pro-life protections a year ago after the Dobbs decision and married that with $100 million in new support for women in crisis pregnancies and newborn care. That's the way forward, and that's how we make progress for life in America.
At the state level, but at the federal level, is there a limit that you're going to pursue?
Well, look, I believe that when the Supreme Court sent Roe versus Wade to the ash heap of history, they returned the question of abortion to the states and to the American people. And while I'll always be a champion for advancing the cause of life as far as we can, I mean, I'd like the day to come that abortion is not only illegal, but it's unthinkable. I'll advance the cause of life in every state in the country. I do think the time has come for a minimum national standard. I mean, right now, America's laws on abortion in half of our states has more in common with the way China and North Korea and Iran deal with abortion, and that is abortion on demand all the way up to the moment of birth. We can do better than that, and by creating a minimum national standard that bans abortion after 15 weeks, I think we'll save tens of thousands of innocent lives. And then we can work every day to continue to advance the cause of life
for a national ban.
Each state across the country.
Well, another issue of life that's a prudential issue for Catholics is immigration. And under the Trump administration, you were part of what was going to be a compromise, helping DACA individuals have a path forward. Is that something that you'll be pursuing?
Well, thank you for knowing about that. It was look, we were working to get the funding to build a wall. You know, I come from Indiana, big farm country, and we have an old saying that good fences make good neighbors. And we built hundreds of miles of border wall. We reduced illegal immigration at the southern border by some 90% through the Remain in Mexico policy and others. But one of the things people miss is that under our administration, we actually offered a solution on Dreamers. I mean, literally,
for the 11 million people who are already here.
Well, but for people that were brought here as children through no fault of their own, we offered to make it possible for those children, many of whom are adults, many of whom have gone on to great careers, and also service in the military of the United States. We said to Democrats in the Congress back at the end of 2018, if you give us the funding for the wall, we'll solve the issue of Dreamers. Now, the larger issues of the 11 million who are here, I think is going to take a longer period of time for us to resolve. But I think if we can secure our border, if we can resolve some of these issues with principle and compassion, I think the next president of the United States will have an opportunity to fix a broken immigration system once and for all. You wouldn't necessarily know it from my last name, but my grandfather immigrated to this country from Ireland. He got off a boat in 1923. Richard Michael Cawley is how Michael Richard Pence got to be Vice President of the United States. This is the nation where dreams come true. And that immigration system is broken today. We can fix it, we can repair it, and after we do all of that, then we can look for opportunities to resolve some of these long-term intractable problems as well.
Well, it's certainly a nation where my dreams have come true. You talked about Ukraine early on. Ukraine was something that came up in an interview where you said something that I think is good for you to clear up. It's not our concern, but it is our concern. You just said it is. Tell me a little more about how you feel about Ukraine and Russia in general.
Sure. We used to have an old term for that. It was called fake news. The internet ended up using a spliced version of an answer, but we addressed it fairly quickly. Look, I believe it's in the national interest of America for us to support the Ukrainian military for one reason. and that is as a father of a captain in the Marine Corps, father-in-law of a lieutenant in the Navy, I have no doubt if Vladimir Putin overruns Ukraine, it's not going to be long before he crosses a border where our men and women in uniform are going to have to go fight him under NATO's Article 5 treaty. And so I believe it's absolutely essential. We're the leader of the free world. We're the arsenal of democracy. Now, there are voices within our party, including other candidates for president, who have called it a territorial dispute, who have suggested that America does not have an interest there. I strongly disagree. As I said before, if America's not leading the free world's not being led. And I don't want to live in a world where China and Russia are setting the rules on the global stage. I want freedom to set the rules on the global stage. And I made that very clear in that interview. And my first priority is the people and the security of the United States of America. I believe it's in our interest, in our security interest, for us to support the Ukrainians as they make the fight against a Russian invasion.
Now, Mr. Pence, I get one more question, and I want to ask you, you're a proven leader. You are a tested leader with what happened in January 6th, but you're trailing in the polls. You're at 5%. Why is that? What are Americans not seeing?
Well, I would say we just announced a little while ago. Give us a little time.
Do you have a pollster now?
Yeah. No, I don't even have a pollster. I will tell you, one of the things I've realized since we moved home to Indiana after leaving the White House is Karen and I, we're well known, but I don't think we're known well. I mean, most Americans know me as a loyal vice president standing beside the president in the most pro-life administration in history, an administration that rebuilt our military, revived our economy, and I couldn't be more proud of that. But as people get to know us on the campaign trail in places like Iowa and New Hampshire, I'm always delighted when I hear the people come up and say, I didn't know you were a governor who cut taxes and balanced budgets and created record employment. I didn't know you were a leader in the Congress of the United States, battling the big spenders of your own party and standing for the right to life. So for 20 years, Karen and I had the opportunity to serve and the chance to say to people that the reason we're running is because we've been blessed with a career of service that I believe has made us the most qualified person in this race to be the next president of the United States. I believe to whom much is given, much will be required. We've been given much. And for all the challenges that we're facing, the failed policies of the Biden administration, I mean, Joe Biden has weakened this country at home and abroad. We felt an obligation to step forward, and I'm confident as we deliver that message, you'll be seeing a whole lot more of the Pences.
Well, that sounds great. We're looking forward to seeing you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
EWTN News will have more coverage of the 2024 presidential election with candidate interviews, polling, and analysis, all from a Catholic perspective. It will be featured across our media platforms, including on this program, EWTN News Nightly, The World Over, EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, the Catholic News Agency, the National Catholic Register, and on social media. There's a lot more ahead on EWTN News in Depth, from Iraq to Lebanon to Azerbaijan to Portugal. We have it covered. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims joyously welcome the Pope at World Youth Day. But all is not smiles, as Pope Francis also takes time to address the long-ignored clergy sex abuse scandal in Portugal. Our team reports from Lisbon when EWTN News in Depth comes back. Hundreds of thousands of young people from all over the world welcome Pope Francis as he arrives in a park in Lisbon, Portugal. Waving flags from more than 190 countries, they join the Holy Father for the opening ceremony of World Youth Day. He told them they are all precious children in God's eyes and that God's heart beats uniquely for them. We have a large EWTN News team on the ground covering this exciting event. Up front and center, correspondent Colin Flynn.
Skeptics said young people wouldn't come in great numbers, that economic worries, post-pandemic concerns, and the abuse crisis in the church would keep them away. And yet, an estimated 300,000 young people filled Edward VII Park in the centre of Lisbon for the opening Mass of World Youth Day. The young people flooded the city of Lisbon, literally coming from every corner of the world. This is the 37th World Youth Day, with Pope Francis touching down on Wednesday morning to share this pilgrimage with the young people, the Pope's second time to ever visit Portugal. After meeting with the country's president, Manuel Rebelo de Sousa, and the Prime Minister, Antonio Costa, the Pope made his first public address, adopting a seafaring theme throughout his speech, linking Portugal's maritime history with the current problems facing Europe.
The ocean, this immense expanse of water, recalls the origins of life. And isn't it a paradox that today's world disregards life, the unborn children, the older people who are abandoned?
The Pope continued to link the vast ocean, Portugal borders, and the current issues facing the world today.
The oceans are warming, and their depths are bringing to light the shamelessness with which we have polluted our common home. How can we claim to believe in young people if we do not give them a healthy space to build their future?
Later that day, the Pope continued the theme of the sea when meeting Portugal's church leaders, using the gospel passage from Luke of casting nets into the deep, to call on them not to become discouraged and to go out and evangelize. Pope Francis then addressed an issue that has caused so much anger and pain among Catholics in Portugal: the release of the country's first large report on sexual abuse within the Portuguese Catholic Church earlier this year.
There are moments in our ecclesial journey when we can feel a weariness, when we seem to be holding only empty nets. Lower the nets anew and embrace the world with the hope brought by the gospel. Scandals have marred the church's face. They call us to a humble and ongoing purification. The victims' cries must always be accepted and listened to.
The release of this report cast a shadow over Lisbon's preparations for World Youth Day, with some Portuguese criticizing the government for hosting and helping to fund the event in light of what some say is a lack of accountability from the church. Alberto Marques Fernandes is a journalist with RTP, the national broadcaster of Portugal, who has been covering the story.
This has been a big year for Portugal and for the Catholic Church in Portugal because of the release of the study that was done into sexual abuse in the church here. What was the reaction to that study that was done?
A very bad reaction. Everybody knows that something happened in the church and is still happening in the church, but nobody has the document saying that. This is a shock. This is our crisis in Portugal. At the same time, we organize the Youth Day, so it's a bit sad.
Bittersweet.
But it's important to talk about that. It's important to clean the house.
Away from the cameras and the press, Pope Francis did meet privately with 13 abuse victims. On Thursday morning, the Pope visited the Catholic University of Portugal, where he heard the testimonies of 4 young people who shared their hopes and dreams for the future, not just for themselves, but also for the entire world. One young woman from Iran, who is now living in Portugal, told the Pope about living in fear for herself and her family, but how that has only strengthened her faith.
After all I've been through, the constant feeling of being without a home, family, friends, being homeless with no money, I feel proud of my new life in this beautiful country.
She finished by telling Pope Francis that she could not describe what it meant for her to be speaking to him.
An event like this is not cheap to put
When we
on.
visited Lisbon a few months ago to report on the preparations for World Youth Day, we sat down with the mayor of Lisbon, Carlos Moedas, and spoke about the scrutiny around the costs of hosting the event, as well as other logistical challenges. Now he says it has all been worth it.
Now the moment has arrived. How is everything going?
It's very well. I think that we are giving an example also to the world that a city like Lisbon is prepared, that we were able to do our job. We have 43,000 people that we are really putting in schools. They sleeping there, they're happy. So we found ways, as I told you.
On Thursday, the pilgrims were back at Edward VII Park, the large blue stage symbolizing a wave in the ocean, where they gave an emotional welcome to Pope Francis. And speaking to them, he told them that they were being called.
Each of us is called by name, called because we are loved. In God's eyes, we are precious children, a unique and original masterpiece, whose beauty we can only begin to glimpse.
Organizers estimate that over 500,000 young people were in the crowd.
Exciting, but also overwhelming with so many people in so many countries.
Of seeing people with like-minded individuals that want to be closer to Christ.
Crazy to see it in person and how many people really love Jesus.
This weekend, Pope Francis and the pilgrims will move location when they go to Tejo Park along the Tejo River. On Saturday night, they will have a candlelit vigil, and then on Sunday, Pope Francis will celebrate the final Mass, bringing World Youth Day to a close with a crowd expected to be up to 1 million. In Lisbon, Portugal, Colin Flynn, EWTN News in Depth.
We are joined now by Archbishop Montse Perez of Philadelphia, who is leading a large contingent of pilgrims from his city to World Youth Day. Looking at social media, your group appears to really be enjoying themselves, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Catherine. It's wonderful to be here with you from Lisbon, Portugal.
Amazing.
The World Youth Day 23. This is amazing.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the Rise Up sessions that you delivered both in English and in Spanish at this World Youth Day. What is a Rise Up session? That's new this year.
Well, they're part of catechesis, right? And each day had a particular focus. One was on social friendship, mercy today. So I gathered with a couple of hundred youth, actually from Spain today. Today I did it in Spanish. And we had a wonderful holy hour, exposition of the Eucharist, opportunity for confession, and finished with a wonderful Mass celebrated by myself and a group of priests, and also the Archbishop of Granada in Spain. So one of the wonderful things of World Youth Day is that it brings all of us from the world, our young people and priests and bishops and religious, all together from the whole world. And it really celebrates the Catholicity, right? The global nature, the universality of the Church.
Absolutely. Well, to that point, you are one of the more than 60 U.S. bishops there in Lisbon. Now, World Youth Day was designed mainly for 16 to 35-year-olds, but has this been an enriching experience for you?
I'm a little older than that.
Just, not by much, but how has this experience been for you and your brother bishops? Have you found it enriching as well?
Oh, yes. We're about 62 bishops from the United States. From Philadelphia, there's 300 pilgrims. From the United States, close to 30,000. And so it's just enriching. It's enlivening of the Church. This is a celebration of Church in all its splendor, and the beauty of the universal Church, gathering together with our Holy Father. It doesn't get any better than this.
And you brought Archbishop Boris Gudziak of the Eparchy of Ukraine in Philadelphia with you. How has having him there created a particular closeness for you to the people of Ukraine?
Well, Archbishop Gudziak and I were both archbishops, metropolitan archbishops in Philadelphia. I of the Latin Rite and he of the Ukrainian Catholic Church. And we're good friends and we're very close. And so there's been a wonderful synergy of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and the Archeparchy of Philadelphia through both of us. So it's great to have him here with some of his young people and staff and one of his priests at a moment that continues to be for Ukraine a time of great suffering, a time of just a time that's really evil in what's being done to them. The Holy Father actually met with Ukrainian citizens and young people last night, I think about 15 of them. And we have had the chance to have Archbishop Gudziak with us. He was gathered with us at the U.S. gathering. And together, all his people and our people from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, we gathered together, we prayed together, and together we blessed our pilgrims, and they bless us by their presence and their faith and their great hope. So I'm sure for him, it is a time of great consolation for him and the people that he's with to be here in solidarity with him.
The Holy Father's visit will include a trip to Fatima on Saturday. I understand you were there earlier. How has the proximity to the Fatima Marian apparition site really helped to shape this particular World Youth Day?
Well, the Holy Father gave the theme, right? She went in haste, recalling the Blessed Mother's journey to Elizabeth, who goes in haste. And so we came here in haste, in search of the Blessed Mother of Our Lady of Fatima. And Tuesday, our group of pilgrims had the opportunity to visit Fatima and visit the houses of the little shepherd children and walk around. It was very peaceful. It was very joyful. It was just a beautiful time. There was I sense a certain quietness and stillness to being there. It certainly was holy ground.
Absolutely. You know, what is the fruit from global church events like this one, Your Excellency? And do you think it's been eye-opening for your group to be surrounded by and praying alongside the universal Catholic Church?
I think for many of them, this is their first World Youth Day. And they realize that the vastness of the church, right? When we're back in the States or whatever country we're in, we're generally focused on our parish and on our diocese and the issues and the great things and the challenging things of our kind of little world there. And events such as World Youth Day, World Meeting of Families, reminds us with the presence of the Holy Father that we're all over the planet, we're all over the world. And that's the fulfillment of the mandate of Jesus to the apostles on the Mount of Olives. Go to all the nations. And here we are over 2,000 years later, and we see the presence of Christ, the presence of the church in the heart of all the nations. You can't escape that here. You cannot escape that. I walked out of our hotel here early, I think it was yesterday morning or this morning, and a group from South Korea, a couple of hundred of them were right across the street. Praying and chanting and listening to God's word.
That is.
You can't escape the universality, all the nations, right? Go
Absolutely.
to all the nations. Well, those apostles, they did.
Absolutely. Well, we are praying for your safe travels back here to the U.S. Thank you so much, Archbishop Perez. Last week on EWTN News In Depth, we introduced you to several American pilgrims headed to Lisbon, including newly ordained Father Nelson Sintra, who attended his first World Youth Day with his older sister in 2011. He said attending the event and a second World Youth Day in 2013 put him on the path to the priesthood. We caught up with Father Sintra this week in Lisbon, where he spoke about the importance of coming together in a big event with large numbers of other pilgrims.
There are people here from all over the world, and in my experiences in World Youth Days in the past, you can walk just a few feet and hear every language spoken, and that's a real vivid representation of the universal church, that we're all here around the Holy Father, and he's here representing Christ for us, so we're really here around Christ, and it's really powerful for our own faith and to edify those of others.
As a new priest, Father Sintra now serves in the Diocese of Boise, Idaho. He was part of a leadership team that brought 50 young people to Lisbon. World Youth Day ends this weekend. Our Colin Flynn will have a wrap-up report on Monday on EWTN News Nightly. News headlines are next in the Week in Review.
Finally, justice has been served. And even though nothing will bring my dad back, I feel like a weight has been lifted, and I can breathe a sigh of relief.
Resolution, finally, for those scarred from the worst attack on American Jews in our nation's history. News from the courtroom ahead. And a Catholic school district is sued for allegedly discriminating against students with disabilities. The sentencing for a mass shooter who opened fire in a Pittsburgh synagogue tops our headlines in the Week in Review. Nearly 5 years after the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue, a judge on Thursday followed the jury's recommendation and formally sentenced gunman Robert Bowers to the death penalty. In the worst anti-Semitic mass shooting in American history, Bowers entered the synagogue in October 2018 and murdered 11 Jewish worshipers and injured 6 others. Prosecutors presented evidence that he had a targeted plan to take out as many people as he could, based on hatred of Jews and immigrants. In this religious community, many prefer the gunman receive life in prison rather than the death penalty. But Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, himself a survivor of the attack, said his congregation accepted the sentencing.
Today we received an immense embrace from the halls of justice around all of us to say that our government does not condone anti-Semitism in its most vile form that we've witnessed, and that we are embraced by a system that has supported, nurtured us, and upheld us, and made the point very clear. We have the right to practice our Judaism, and no one will ever take that right away from us.
Bowers' death sentence is the first under the Biden administration, which has imposed a moratorium on executions. Following the sentencing, a group advocating against the death penalty, the Catholic Mobilizing Network, acknowledged the pain of those who lost loved ones in the mass shooting and said it held, quote, our Jewish brothers and sisters in prayer. But the executive director of the Catholic Mobilizing Network said, at the same time, we recognize that the federal death penalty is a fatally flawed system that offers many empty promises. If we really want to reduce violence, racism, and anti-Semitism in our country, we can't afford to divert our efforts toward perpetuating the cycle of violence through executions. The threat of violence has prompted the U.S. State Department to issue a travel advisory telling Americans not to go to Haiti because of kidnappings, crime, and growing civil unrest. It's ordered family members of U.S. government employees and non-emergency government employees to leave, and urging U.S. citizens to do the same. The State Department advisory comes after a gang abducted an American nurse and her child. The United Nations reports more than 1,000 kidnappings in Haiti so far this year. Israel's Supreme Court heard the first in a series of appeals on Thursday, linked to a judicial overhaul. 3 judges heard a challenge to a law which makes it more difficult to declare the prime minister incapacitated or unfit for office. Until the law passed in March, that power rested with the attorney general. Now it goes to the cabinet instead. The hearing comes amid mass protests over the government's separate judicial overhaul plan. Next month, all 15 Supreme Court judges will convene for the first time ever to hear challenges to one of the new laws, which curbs Supreme Court powers by preventing the court from reviewing the reasonableness of government decisions. The Archdiocese of New Orleans is facing a class action lawsuit after allegations it discriminated against children with disabilities by incorporating questions about disabilities and medical information on school applications. A federal judge reversed an earlier ruling that placed an indefinite hold on the suit nearly a year ago by a judge presiding over the church's ongoing bankruptcy case. The attorney representing the 2 clients in the case argues that schools receiving state money cannot use an admissions application that elicits medical information. The suit is not seeking damages. It only asks the Archdiocese to change the questions on its applications. Next, challenges for Christianity in the Middle East. More conversations about the church from Montse's assignment in California.
As a church, we would be always there to stand for the justice, and whenever there is unjust treatment of anyone, we should be the voice for them.
We are following several developing stories impacting Christians in the Middle East, specifically in Iraq, Lebanon, and the Azerbaijan-Armenia region. We begin with a follow-up on Iraq. About 250 to 300,000 Christians live in Iraq, less than 1% of the total population, but most of those Christians are Chaldean Catholics in communion with the Holy See. As we told you 2 weeks ago, the president of Iraq, Abdul Rashid, revoked a decree recognizing Cardinal Louis Sacco as head of the Christian church in Iraq and manager of its endowments. Sacco has been a leader in the Eastern Rite Church for 2 decades, since before the fall of Saddam Hussein, and patriarch since 2013. The move to revoke recognition is unprecedented. Following the president's decision, Cardinal Sacco left Baghdad at the end of July and relocated to a monastery in Kurdistan, an autonomous region of Iraq. On Wednesday, Sacco published a letter to the president blasting his decision, writing, "This is a malicious decision against the Chaldean church and a soft type of persecution and displacement." He also writes that in order for him to return to the capital of Baghdad, quote, "I will only accept a new decree declaring your recognition of me as supreme head of the Chaldean church and in charge of all its endowments." The Chaldean Catholic Church owns large amounts of valuable property, particularly in Baghdad, and analysts say the church may be the victim of a corrupt government interested in plunder. From her assignment on location in California, Montse Alvarado spoke with Archbishop Bashar Warda of the Archdiocese of Erbil, Iraq, to get his view on the president's action against Cardinal Sacco.
Is there a better way that this situation with Cardinal Sacco could have been worked out?
Of course, the president and presidency office have issued so many statements to clarify the situation, that we are not against the patriarch, we are not against the cardinal, we are not the one who appointed the cardinal as a cardinal. He's been appointed, he's been elected by the Chaldean Synod, he's been appointed by the Vatican. They've explained that, and they said these Republican degrees are not meant for him and for other church leaders because we are not the one who appointed them church leaders. They are elected by their church's synod, and these withdrawal or cancelling of their degree does not really cancel any of their duties, or does not come closer to their dignity as cardinals. But I would say the timing and the way was a bit problematic. I mean, for the president, I'm not here to advise, but I've said it several times. There was another way. If the president wants really to evoke or to make any change, or he was supposed to call all these church leaders in a friendly meeting and tell them that, listen, these kind of Republican degrees does not hold any constitutional base, or all of these explanations, and I'm going to cancel this and present you with a new procedure that would maintain your rights as a church leader, the custodian of the endowment, all of these issues, which is quite important for us, because at the end of the day, as a bishop, I would want to see that these properties, church properties and endowments is secure, and I am the one who is in control of all of this according to the canon law, and that's really important. So there was a better way, not going to the public, not going to the media, and try to do it in a friendly manner, especially that Cardinal Sacco is well-known figure, that he is always for Iraq, always supporting the Iraqi stability, or a voice for Iraq in so many international platforms.
Do you think that this is still developing? Will we see more changes to find that security for the church and its property?
I think that people are working closely together to find not just a solution, but a way to ensure that all these church properties are under the administration of the church and under the administration of the patriarchs, because there are 3 patriarchs there, yes, and also bishops and church leaders.
It's alleged that Iraq's president revoked Sacco's authority following a meeting with the head of the Iran-backed Christian political party called the Babylon Movement. It is an armed militia that emerged to fight the Islamic State. The Babylon movement has been accused of illegal land seizures and presents itself as Chaldean Catholic and Christian, but is mostly composed of Shiite Muslims. In 2021, the Babylon movement took 4 of the 5 seats in the Iraqi parliament reserved for Christian candidates, which has raised concerns not only about true Christian representation, but also the growing influence of Iran within Iraqi politics. Turning to Lebanon now, this week marks 3 years since a colossal explosion ripped through the capital Beirut, leveling buildings and shattering everything in its path. More than 200 people died and thousands of others were injured when tons of ammonium nitrate stored in a warehouse detonated in one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. Last Sunday, Pope Francis renewed his prayers for the victims of the catastrophe.
This coming August 4th will mark 3 years since the devastating explosion in the port of Beirut. I renew my prayer for the victims and their families who are seeking truth and justice, and I hope that Lebanon's complex crisis may find a solution worthy of the history and values of that people. Let us not forget that Lebanon is also a message.
The investigation into the blast has been hampered by political interference, and there are calls by some UN officials for an independent investigation. The explosion caused some $15 billion worth of property damage and left an estimated 300,000 people homeless. Since the explosion, the financial crisis that began in Lebanon in 2019 has only worsened. On Monday, the embattled central bank governor stepped down from his 30-year tenure after allegations of financial crimes. Many in Lebanon blame him for the country's economic downfall. The crisis has pulverized the Lebanese pound, wiped out the savings of many residents, led to crippling inflation, and left 3/4 of the country's 6 million people in poverty. Lebanon has a unique history of Muslim-Christian conviviality that dates back 100 years. About 61% of the population is Muslim. 33% of the population is Christian, with Maronite Catholics representing the largest Christian group, numbering around 1.5 million people. During her assignment in California, Montse also sat down with Archbishop Gregory Mansour of the Maronite Catholic Eparchy in Brooklyn, New York. She asked why Americans in the U.S. government should care about Lebanon.
Tell our government that Lebanon is worth it. Let's not abandon Lebanon because Iran is pulling it one way, Saudi Arabia is pulling it the other way. And to say that Christians are the leaven of that society, working with Shiites and working with Sunnis, to bring them both together at the table. That's why it's been so hard to get a new president, because we're pulled in 2 different directions. But the West, especially America, can play a very important role to advocate and to assist, and especially the Catholic institutions of Lebanon. We work hard, Bishop Zaidan and I, to keep them afloat. We're trying to help the Catholic schools, hospitals, nursing homes, drug rehabilitation centers, service for the poor, for the refugee in Lebanon, to help them sustain themselves.
And from Lebanon to the Caucasus, where an underreported blockade is impeding humanitarian aid in a little-known mountainous region in Azerbaijan. The area is called Nagorno-Karabakh, also referred to as Artsakh. The land that was part of historical Armenia and inhabited by Armenians for centuries is today populated by 120,000 people, 99% of whom are ethnic Armenian. Azerbaijan is predominantly populated by ethnic Turks. In modern history, the region has been disputed over for the last 3 decades between Armenia and Azerbaijan since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Nagorno-Karabakh is connected to Armenia through a route called the Lachin Corridor. Since December of 2022, that roadway has been blocked by Azerbaijani protesters, which has now evolved into a full Azerbaijan military blockade. The ever-tightening blockade has painted a dire picture. The International Committee of the Red Cross issued a statement saying tens of thousands of people rely on humanitarian aid reaching them through these routes. The civilian population is now facing a lack of life-saving medication and essentials. To give us a little more background and context on this alarming situation is Simone Rizkala, Special Advisor to the Philos Project, Armenia. Simone, welcome to the program. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is the longest running in post-Soviet Eurasia. Why is this area disputed, and why should Christians care?
Thank you for having me on. The area is disputed because although it's ethnically Armenian and religiously Christian and historically has always been part of Armenia, Stalin, during the Soviet Union, gave that territory under Azerbaijan jurisdiction. So the Azeris don't recognize it as belonging to Armenia.
Okay.
And Christians should care because this is a 1,700-year-old Christian nation, the first Christian nation to declare Christianity its official state religion. So Christians everywhere should care about their fellow Christians, especially the first Christian nation in history.
Really important context there. And can you explain, why would activists block a road and cause this humanitarian crisis? What is the goal there?
Yeah, these activists are actually not really activists. They are government stooges who are hired by the government to create some sort of ecological excuse for protesting the blockade. But at this moment, that charade is no longer there. It is Azeri military on the ground creating a blockade because they want to ethnically and religiously cleanse the area of Armenian Christians, resettle it, and populate it with Azeris.
Simone, I understand that you know people on the ground in this region. What are you hearing directly from them?
The situation is so very dire. People are fatigued, they're starving, there's no food, there's no fuel. The malnutrition is causing, the latest thing I've heard is skyrocketing miscarriages. There are children who have died, children who are on the streets looking for their parents. It's a terrible, terrible situation and the true definition of a crisis.
And what kind of response are you seeing from the U.S. so far on this?
Well, fortunately, the Biden administration did recognize the Armenian genocide, but unfortunately, the Biden administration isn't upholding the Freedom Support Act, Section 907, which says that if the United States is going to continue to give aid to Azerbaijan, you can't go ahead and turn around and use that aid and towards aggression towards the Armenians. So all we have to do as Americans is say, hey, if we're going to stop giving you aid until you agree to stop using this against Armenia.
Simone, this may be the first time that some viewers and listeners are hearing about this. Do you have anything else you want to add and let our viewers know?
Thank you so much for that opportunity. Yes, first, please pray for the people of Artsakh and the Nagorno-Karabakh. Please help us raise awareness. Please follow the Philos Project on your social media. There's no voice that's too little. Hashtag Save Armenia. Contact your congressman. We're doing newsletter updates through the Philos Project Save Armenia. And yes, please, Sam Brownback, former Senator Brownback, is doing a lot to kind of rally leaders and Christian leaders in particular to start caring about this issue. There was a time in American history where, and this is during the First World War, that it was actually Americans. The first time the Red Cross went internationally was to Armenia to help the Armenians of that region. And now it's another century and another genocide. And we need Americans to use the power that they have to save this tiny Christian nation landlocked among, a pan-Turkic region that really wants to see this Armenians and the country of Armenia obliterated from the world map.
And Simone, can you expand on the importance of us supporting our fellow Christians abroad?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many reasons to support, first on a human level, second on a Christian and Catholic level. Again, that the first Christian nation, even Mount Ararat in ancient Armenia was where Noah's Ark landed. So we could say that we all have spiritual DNA in us from this beautiful land, this beautiful people who refuse, no matter how many times they get massacred through history, refuse to give up their Christian faith. And also as Westerners, Armenia is a democratic country, Christian, and upholds Western values in a region that does not share Western values or Western faith. So this is important both spiritually and culturally.
Well, Simone, be assured that we join our prayers with you. Thank you so much for joining us and bringing this important insight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dizei primeiro, paz é esta casa.
Some final images from World Youth Day when EWTN News In Depth returns. Before we go, we take one quick look again at the sights and experiences of this year's World Youth Day in Lisbon, Portugal. These visuals put together for you by our EWTN News team for Images of the Week. Enjoy. What a beautiful experience for all those pilgrims able to make the journey to World Youth Day. And that's it for this edition of EWTN News In Depth. I'm Catherine Hadro. Montse Alvarado will be back next week to share more news and stories important to your Catholic life. God bless.